Welcome to Rosie the Reviewer. We're your hosts. I'm Sam.
And I'm Marcia.
And we like World War II media and we want to talk about it. Welcome back to Rosie the Reviewer. This week we are talking about Le Grand Cirque, in English, The Big Show, which was a movie that came out in 1950. It was directed by Georges Peclet and written by André Castelot, Georges Peclet, and Joseph Kessel. It's based on the 1948 memoir of the same name by Pierre Clostermann, which sold roughly 3 million copies. It's very, very famous in France. And Clostermann himself was an ace fighter pilot during World War II. He flew over 400 missions, and he claims 33 air-to-air combat victories. Now, one thing you should know about Pierre, The Guardian calls his memoir shot through with romantic inaccuracy, and that seems to be a little bit true. So we think maybe his air-to-air victories are more likely to be around the 18 mark instead of the 33 mark. But he did destroy 225 trucks, 72 locomotives, 5 tanks, and 2 torpedo boats. And by all accounts, he was a tremendous pilot. So no shade. He was just a guy who embellished a little bit, like a lot of these guys. What did you think of the movie?
The movie was a challenge for me because I feel like we should mention this. The movie is only available in French without subtitles. And whereas Sam speaks a little bit to a lot of French, I speak barely any French. So it was a fun little challenge for me. I did enjoy the movie, but not a whole lot of specific things happen in the movie. It's just a lot of people going on missions, flyboys being flyboys, and occasionally hitting on a very pretty lady. But I don't know, it's not bad. I found it interesting, maybe because it's French too. I don't know. That kind of added another dimension for me. But I am a little bit jealous because you read the book and the book sounds amazing.
Yeah, the book is really good. So I read it in the original French, so I can't speak for the English translation, but Pierre was a pretty good writer. I mean, he was an educated guy. We'll talk about it a bit later about his post-war career and that kind of stuff, but he was an aeronautical engineer. And so he obviously knows quite a lot about the planes that he's flying in. And he's great at describing dogfights and bomb runs and all that kind of stuff. But he's also really good at telling little self-deprecating stories about himself in a really funny way. He's really great at describing the more somber moments, the emotional difficulties that him and his friends went through, the less fun things that happened to them during the war. It's a really enjoyable memoir. I would say it's probably entered my top 5 of World War II memoirs that I've read. So I really enjoyed that. Yeah. But yeah, I thought that the movie could have been way better based on how good the memoir was. The movie does use a few clips from real dogfights and such that took place during the war. They took some from German propaganda films, I believe. So there is some real footage. I don't feel like they made that great of use of it or fit it in as well as they could have. And I also found the movie kind of samey. All they do is they go on a mission and then they go on another mission and then they go on another mission. And there's nothing appreciably that kind of differentiates them from each other. And the book had so many big swings from a funny moment to a really sad moment and was really kind of imbued with this sense of who Pierre Clostermann was as a person. And I found that you didn't really get that so much in the movie. It was kind of hard to tell the characters apart. I don't think the acting was tremendous. So yeah, overall, probably not a huge fan of the movie. But the book was great.
All the white guys definitely all look the same, especially in black and white.
Y'all, the 3 friends, the 3 kind of main characters of the movie, one of them is much shorter than the other 2. So in my mind, it was like, that's the short one. Like, I'm keeping track. I know who he is. But then there's big chunks in the movie where he's not with the other 2. And I was like, is that the short one? Without being able to compare him to the other 2, I have no idea.
Yeah, I feel like the movie kind of lacked in storytelling overall. A lot of stuff just happens, but there's not really a reason for a lot of it. Where in good movies you get motivations and all that sort of stuff, and you get none of that in this movie.
So they didn't seem to be trying to create a narrative with a beginning and a middle and a climax and an end. It was just like, here's a bunch of stuff that happened.
Yeah, I did laugh at the Brits in this. The Brits in this are funny. They speak in a very strange... I'm really confused by this. I don't know if that's how they spoke, but they don't do it in modern movies anymore. The Brits speak British, but very slowly, and it made me laugh.
Well, the thing is, so you were talking about how this movie is not subtitled, so it's all in French. Well, There's also no option. If French people are watching this and they don't speak English, the English is not subtitled for French people either. So I think the British actors had to speak slowly for people who maybe don't speak English that well to understand them. And there's also chunks of the movie in German that's not subtitled. I was like, wow, they really didn't make this very accessible for anyone.
But like for me, it gave the movie a sense of mystery that maybe wasn't there in the movie. Like,
a great sense of mystery because you didn't know what the fuck was happening.
so Sam wrote notes for me before I watched the movie because she watched it before me, so I could just kind of read along with her notes as the movie was going. I know French, but it's hard to understand in the movie for sure.
The sound quality isn't great. They speak super quickly. Yeah, there was definitely a couple of scenes where I had to slow it down to like 0.75 to kind of pick up what they were saying. So it's definitely also, I mean, for me, I'm so used to listening to people speak with a French Canadian accent that I'm listening to real French people speak in the 1950s. I'm like, what? It takes my brain a second to catch up.
Yeah. All right, let's get into the plot. The movie opens, as many do, with an opening card. The opening card reads, "The heroes of this movie lived, except for Pierre Dupont, who is a composite, and were my friends. Their story as presented here is a loyal recounting of the most rigorous truth," which is a quote by Pierre Clostermann. The movie is dedicated to the memory of the Force Aérienne Française Libre. They wanted armistice only after victory.
The Free French Air Force was established in Britain in June of 1940, around the time of the fall of France. As you can imagine, a lot of French airmen made it out of France. They still wanted to participate in the war. So it eventually consisted of 11 squadrons, which were attached to the RAF, the Royal Air Force. And they participated in the North African campaign, in Italy, and all across Northwestern Europe. And there were also Free French bomber groups.
I feel like this is similar to kind of how some of the Polish flyboys joined the RAF. So it's like a little attachment to the Brits. So they were flying from the UK at this point, right? At the beginning.
Yeah, exactly. And obviously the French were being, or the Free French, I guess, were being led by Charles de Gaulle, who was based in London at this point. And Pierre actually met Charles de Gaulle a couple of times. And one time when he met him, he had just gotten promoted to lieutenant, I think. He had just been commissioned as an officer. And so he bought this fancy little stick to carry around so he could look fancy and cool. Anyway, he met Charles de Gaulle, and Charles de Gaulle razzed the shit out of him for carrying that stick around. He's like, "I don't think that's part of your uniform. It looks bad." Was there watching and just made fun of him, of course.
I feel like Pierre is the kind of guy to humble brag about meeting Charles de Gaulle.
Yeah, although by all accounts, it was, it was a bit of an embarrassing, cringeworthy experience for him.
So after this opening card, we start in Biggin Hill, England, in 1943. We meet our three main characters as they are having their photo taken with the rest of the Free French pilot. The main characters are Pierre Dupont, played by Pierre Clostermann, Jean Lussic, played by Roger Châtel, and Jacques Desmarais, played by Jean Bérard. They're kind of like messing around. And as they're out there getting their picture taken, a young woman in a women's army corps called Patricia, who's played by Pamela Skiff, happens by with her uncle, the British commander, and all the young men get their flirt on and they're very annoying with her.
Yes, Patricia, she's in the Women's Army Corps, and she actually works, when they go up on missions, she works in the control room. So we'll see her a bit more in this movie.
We'll see her on the phone.
We will, yes. I know that all the characters in this movie are supposed to be based on real people, but having read the memoir, I know who Jacques is based on because he was basically Pierre's best friend, ride or die during the war. I have no idea who Jean is supposed to be based on, but I guess it doesn't really matter. He's probably just an amalgam of real people. But to give you some backstory on Pierre, he was raised in Brazil in a French diplomatic family. He studied aeronautical engineering in the US and got his pilot's license in 1940 when he was 19. He applied but was denied entry into the French Air Force in 1940. And then a little while later, his father wrote to him at college and said, "Look, you need to go to Brazil, get your mother, bring her to Brazzaville. If you recall, I think we talked about Brazzaville in the Casablanca episode. That was the capital of Free France in Africa. That's where Charles de Gaulle was, and a lot of these guys were. And so his dad, being a diplomat, was like, go get your mom, bring her to Brazzaville. And at this point, Pierre had been reading about the exploits of the RAF in the news, the Battle of Britain and all that stuff. And it settled him. He was going to leave school and he's going to fly Spitfires. And he's really looking forward to it. So he joined the Free French Forces in the UK in March 1942, obviously had to do some training. And then he was posted to 341 Squadron RAF in January of 1943.
I mean, can you blame him if you've seen a Spitfire? It looks so cool. If I was a boy and I was 19, I'd be like, yeah, I want to fly a Spitfire.
Yeah. Well, okay, so he gets to the UK. First of all, any of these French pilots who show up to fly, they have to go through this whole interrogation process because they could be Vichy French infiltrators and spies, right? So he goes through all of this interrogation and they're like, okay, fine, you can fly. Well, now we know you have your pilot's license, but we want to see what you can do. So he's getting ready to take up this examiner guy in the plane so he can show his flying skills. And the guy says, try not to scare me too much. But the engine is super, super loud and Pierre can't really hear him. So he mishears it as try to scare me. And so he takes the guy up. He does a barrel roll. He's doing this and that. He gets back down to the ground. The guy's like, you can fly, but not in a plane that has me in it ever again.
Well, I guess they learned that Pierre wasn't afraid of being daring and dashing in his plane.
Yeah, he had no fear, that guy. That's for sure.
Yeah. So the French pilots head up on a mission. We don't really know what the fuck they're doing. They don't really say. They just go off on a mission. And we see a couple shots skipping back and forth between the planes, which I think we both see them in their cockpit as well as just actual footage from planes. And mission control, where the English are very annoyed with the French speaking over the radio, and they're like, shut up, bloody Frenchman. And they just kind of go on a mission and come back. And to blow off steam later that night, everybody gathers for a party in a mess hall, where Pierre and Jacques are both still very taken by Patricia, and they both hit on her, but Jacques wins out and he wins her affections.
Yeah, Patricia is not a real person. Pierre doesn't talk about women very much in his book. Wikipedia says he got married during the war, but there's no mention of it in his memoir, so I don't know.
They must have added her just to kind of appeal to a broader audience, is what I'm thinking.
Yeah, I mean, I think you probably need to have a female character in there. It helps to have some eye candy. There's also a story in the book where Pierre's friend Jacques is dating this woman, and they're serving way up in the Orkneys at this point, right? They start at Biggin Hill, they go up to the Orkneys. A little while later, they're down in Brighton again. So they're kind of moving all over the place throughout their careers in the army. But they're up in the Orkneys, and Jacques hears that this woman he's been sleeping with is going to get married. And he's like, I got to stop her. And Pierre's like, how are you going to stop her? We're up in the back of Beyond. And Jacques is like, Pierre, for me, your best friend Jacques, would you please go to the base commander and ask if I can borrow his personal plane? And Pierre is sort of the spokesman / leader of the Free French guys who are in this squadron. And he's like, dude, he's not going to let you borrow your plane. And Jacques is like, do it for me. I'm in love, Pierre, please. So Pierre goes to the base commander and he's like, honestly, I think the guy was just so stunned by my audacity that he said yes. So Jacques and Pierre take the plane. At one point, they run out of gas, so they're late bringing the plane back. Pierre gets in trouble. Jacques never does manage to stop this woman from marrying this guy. Anyway, it's like this whole story that they tell, and it's just shenanigans.
Where are the Orkneys? Is that Scotland?
Yeah, like way up north.
All right.
Yeah, they were watching over a naval base up there, I believe.
Sometimes you tell these stories from the book, and I'm like, how are these men serious flyboys? Like, how are these actual fighter pilots? They are boys. They are acting like boys.
They really are. And I also think because their job was so dangerous that it was a work hard, play hard situation where they would really blow off steam in extravagant style as well. But yeah, Pierre, he initially flew Spitfires. Sometimes he would fly 2 or 3 missions a day if the weather was cooperating. So that's how he got up to 400 plus missions. And he participated in every brand of fighter plane mission you can think of. So he did dive bombing runs, he did bomber escort, he did recon flights, sweeps, patrols, ground target attacks. He as I said, served for a period up north in the Orkneys. He also participated in the bombing of V1 installations. He flew cover during the Normandy landings. In late 1944, he trained on and made the switch to Typhoons, which were British ground attack aircraft that were in heavy use in the later part of the war because they could shoot down V1s. And they were also known as a tank destroyer, so they could destroy tanks from the air. And he also flew Tempest, which were kind of like a redesigned version of the Typhoon. And they were the fastest piston engine fighter of World War II at low altitudes, but they were kind of tricky to handle. And he describes it in the book, having to learn how to fly Tempest was quite a change from flying Spitfires. That's what he did basically during the war.
I feel like most people will know, but just in case, a V1 is a rocket.
Yes.
It's like a big, massive rocket, like a not fun rocket. I mean, no rockets are fun when they're in the hands of the enemy, but just saying.
Yeah, well, and if you think about it, think about how fast the Typhoon would have to fly to be able to shoot down a V1 rocket. Like, these things really got going.
Yeah, like, I've seen pictures of all these fighter planes. They look mega fast. Like, I'm just like, I can't imagine being in one. But thankfully, I don't have to imagine. I don't have to be in one. So, as Sam already kind of announced, they go on a bunch of missions in this movie. So, they go on another one. And this time, Jacques has plane trouble on the way back, and he isn't able to jump out in time. So he has a lucky landing, and he goes to a hospital. Patricia visits him in the hospital. He's staying with him all night. It's quite cute. And then Jacques decides that he doesn't want to stay in the hospital, and he goes on a date with Patricia instead. And the other two, Jean and Pierre, get drunk and steal a car, which sounds really smart. The next morning, they lie about it, and they also somehow do not get in trouble. But they do take the nick out of some MPs by, like, messing them about. It's really kind of a silly scene.
Yeah. In the book, there are 2 New Zealand pilots under his command later in the war who do this, but it seems like they just took it and assigned it to other characters, which is fine.
It's more fun.
But there is actually a story in the book where when they were stationed up in the Orkneys, lots of times the weather would just be too terrible in the winter to fly. And so they would get really bored. So their CO was like, all right, what we're going to do is everyone's going to go into the countryside and we're going to give you a head start. And then we're going to send the MPs after you. And whoever doesn't get caught the longest wins. And really not very in the spirit of things, Pierre and Jacques decide they're going to go into a pub instead of hiding in the woods and, doing what they're supposed to be doing. And so they're in there and they get shit-faced drunk. And the MPs eventually show up because they've been gone 4 hours and everyone thinks that they've frozen to death. And Pierre is so drunk, he's like face planning, but Jacques has the presence of mind to buy a bottle of booze for the CO to sort of smooth the blow when they get back.
Bribery.
Yeah. And so they get back and the CO is like, why didn't you just do the maneuver? And they were like, well, sir, we're French. If we get shot down over France, we'll just go to the pub and wait for the resistance to come get us.
Again, these boys are so unserious in real life. Like in the movie, it's not that bad. I feel like the truth is stranger in nonfiction in this case.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, surprise, they go on yet another mission. But this time, one of the 3, Jean, doesn't make it back. His plane is crashed in Normandy, and he survived, but his plane is on fire, and so is his face. So, he survives, but just barely. He looks kind of messed up. But he's saved by 2 French civilians, including a peasant who doesn't really like the Nazis. He's played by Edouard Delmont, and they help him. And Jean is mostly worried that he's blind, but he doesn't want to go to a hospital because he wants to go back to England and escape. He wants to escape back to England via Spain. So they put him on a train to Spain.
Yeah, apparently Edouard Delmont was a well-known French character actor. Yeah, I think you can kind of tell he chews the scenery a little bit, but he's kind of fun.
Yeah.
I loved it. He's got these huge sunglasses on because his eyes are fucked, right? And he's just standing in the train station, so conspicuous with his sunglasses on. I was like, good luck.
Are you a spy? You look like one.
Yeah. I don't have any information about, I don't really know who Jean is supposed to be based on. And I don't really have any information about Jacques getting shot down either, which is not to say it didn't happen. It just didn't get mentioned in Pierre's memoir. But Pierre himself did get shot down flying over Germany in March of 1945. Luckily, he was able to get back to his own lines, and he only spent a week in the hospital with a leg wound. But when he got back, his wingmates wrote him a big sign that says, "Leave it to me, it's a piece of cake," which they swear he said over the radio before he charged in to a situation that ended up getting shot down. And he was like, "I don't think I said that." And they were like, "You definitely said that." And they just razzed him about it for the rest of the war.
It sounds like him. He sounds like a bit of a big talker, like big talk, but
Yeah.
real fun too. Like, if you're gonna be in a war, thank God you've got these mates trying to make it slightly easier and annoying.
Yeah.
Next, Jacques and Pierre get officers' commissions, so they get very pithy new uniforms. And Jacques takes Patricia on another date, but Patricia's uncle warns her about him. But she doesn't really listen because she's in love.
Yeah. The shoehorned romance of it all.
Yeah,
What kind of kissing did they do? Was it face sucking? I didn't notice.
I think so, but it wasn't enough to make me go ick. So, must not have been that bad.
Maybe the French are just better at it. They do get a genre of kissing named after them.
I mean, it is French kissing. So, the next bit is kind of fun. The French commander, Captain Mouchot, played by Jean Christian, is planning Grand Cirque, which is where the name is from. And they are going to try and take out the Richthofen wing, which is a wing of German fighter pilots. And it's so important that Mouchot will fly the lead. He wants to be the lead in this. Like, he doesn't have to be, but he wants.
Yeah. The Richthofen wing, it was a very successful German fighter wing during World War II. It was named after the Red Baron from World War I. Everyone recalls the good old Red Baron. Oh, he was a big-time World War I flying ace on the German side. He's the only one I could name.
Okay.
He's actually, in the Snoopy cartoons, he's always trying to shoot down the Red Baron.
I'm sorry, my childhood is flawed. I don't know any of this.
Anyway, the wing flew both Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf 190s and was basically a menace on the English Channel. And so it was a major priority of the RAF to try and get rid of them, or at least dissuade them from being such pains in the asses. So there's a specific airstrip mentioned in the book called Thiqueville. And this was a French airstrip that was taken over by the Germans when they took over France in 1940. They used it till July of 1943, and then they ended up having to evacuate it because it was deemed too exposed to English bombing because it was so close to the coast. And they used it afterward, but only for transit and repair. But it was one of the airstrips used to great effect by the Richthofen unit to hammer the British and Canadians at Dieppe, which we have mentioned before.
Yeah, it's like whenever we mention something now that we've talked about before, I'm like, I know this. It's so nice.
Yeah.
So naturally, this is followed up by Mouchot's big mission day. We get some German POV where there's no subtitles again. But unfortunately, a couple of Spitfires go down over Normandy, including Jacques. He encounters a priest played by Pierre Larquet, I don't know, who hides him from the Germans in a familiar method by now because it's in a coffin. And Jacques, like Jean, is very determined to get back home or to get back to England.
Yeah. The real Mouchot was shot down on the 27th of August, 1943. Pierre talks about it pretty extensively in the book. It seems like what happened was he got separated from the rest of the group. He was fighting a huge number of enemy and he got separated. And then it's kind of unclear what happened next because they didn't find his body for quite some time. But it seems like what happened was he went down in the North Sea, way further north than they were expecting. And Pierre talks about how he thinks maybe there was some battle fatigue involved because based on what he heard about where the body was found and what had happened to the plane, etc., he didn't really think that a pilot as good as Mouchot would just go down like that unless there were extenuating circumstances. And it seems like Pierre found this to be very understandable. He was like, honestly, I'm shocked that more of us didn't lose it a little bit. Mouchot's last words that were heard on the radio were, "I am alone with the bombers." And yeah, his diaries were published in 1949. In English, they're called the Mouchot Diaries, and you can have a look. I believe they're available in bookstores.
I feel like I'm alone with the bombers sounds kind of haunting in a way. There's no one else here but these bombers.
Yeah.
It's inevitable. Like, there's an inevitability to that in some way.
Yeah, for sure.
Jack makes it back to England first. D-Day is in the air. And Pierre is kind of a lucky son of a bitch because he's made flight leader with the number 3 squadron of the RAF.
Yeah, Pierre got promoted a few times in real life, but not until 1945. I think this is just the movie playing a little fast and loose with timelines, but that's fine. He has a little conversation with Jean, and Jean's still fucked up, right? His eyes are not so good. They're healing. He's not blind anymore, but he's not doing great. And thinking back over the movie, I was like, is this the last time we see Jean? Like, did he just go home? I was very confused.
I don't think it's explained at all. You get a sense that he's no longer able to fly, probably because of his eyes. But they don't say so. They just have a conversation and then we never see him again.
It was especially tough for me because he was the one I found most recognizable of the three.
Why? Because he was blind with sunglasses on.
No, because he was tall and he had dark hair. And I was like, once he was gone, the other two, I'm like, these guys are too similar. I have no idea which one is Pierre and which one is Jacques.
I agree. They do also look kind of the same smooth. They're like these really charming fighter pilots. And they've got the same hair. So we don't see Jean again. But Jacques does make it back. And it's clear that everyone is starting to get a little bit itchy about all their friends dying. The mood kind of changes in this part of the movie. They're getting new pilots who are young men with very little flying experience. And it's around this time that the squadron moves across the channel back to France.
Yeah, Pierre talks in the book about how before he ever went to war, he had logged hundreds of hours of flight time. And towards the end, they were getting replacement pilots that had flown a Spitfire for like 1 or 2 hours. So,
yeah.
And then they were just
Good luck.
Yeah. So within a few weeks of D-Day in the summer of 44, the Free French squadrons were once again stationed on the continent. And actually the week after D-Day, Pierre was one of the first Free French pilots to touch down on French soil in 4 years. They teamed up with interior French forces units. These were ex-Air Force resistance members flying captured aircraft, and they participated in the liberation of the rest of France. And they continued to fly missions until the end of the war, when they were incorporated back into the regular French Air Force. And with regard to Pierre, he got his Distinguished Flying Cross in July of 44. And shortly after, they also sent him on a little mental health break because they were like, wow, Pierre, we can really tell that you don't care if you live or die at this point. You need to go work in general staff for a little while and not fly any more planes.
It's rough, man. I mean, they've done so many missions too, and so many people have not come back, so I can't really blame them. You also gotta wonder, like, when is my luck gonna run out? Thinking the chances of me surviving statistically are getting smaller and smaller and smaller.
Yeah, exactly. And there are not only physical effects of anxiety and trauma, but there's physical effects from flying at high altitudes in these little planes, from dive bombing. Some of the guys would get like bleeding in their lungs and that kind of stuff. And so it was a whole thing. It was not great for your health to fly these fighter planes. We'll say that.
I feel like that's true for most of the war.
Yeah.
Not good for the health in general.
Yeah. There's a story in the book where there's a young pilot and it's his first mission or something like that. And he's flying into the base and his plane has been badly damaged by flak. So his landing gear is fucked up, like it's stuck half out. And Pierre's CO comes to get him and is like, look, can you come up into the tower and talk to this guy on the radio and tell him how to land this plane? Because I don't know how he's going to put it down. So Pierre goes up into the tower and he's like, did you try this? And the guy's like, yeah, I tried that. And he's like, well, did you try this? So he tries that. Doesn't work. And at this point, the young pilot is starting to panic. And because he's got to put this plane down because it's really fucked up. He's like, well, I'm just going to try and land it. And Pierre is like, well, you can't land it like that because you can't bring the wheels up and do a belly landing and you can't bring the wheels down and land it properly. But at this point, the pilot has turned his radio off. And Pierre is like, I was trying to tell him to jump. Like he should have taken his parachute and jumped out of the plane and just ditched it. But the pilot tried to land the plane. And as you can imagine, it did not go well. There was a massive explosion. And Pierre basically got to watch them drag this body out of the fire at the end. And it was still twitching.
No, that reminds me a little bit of that one moment in Memphis Belle where they're listening to the guy die on the radio. It's a similar vibe for sure. Man, that's horrible. How do you deal with that kind of stuff? I guess you don't really, which is why they all needed to go and leave.
Yeah, and he was working in general staff for 5 or 6 months. He was on leave from flying, so clearly they thought he needed it.
Yeah, and like we already said, the movie has a change of tone somewhere halfway through, and it kind of continues when the war's not going great for these French guys. The wing commander gets shot down, and Pierre gets promoted again. Jacques has been a bit upset and morose about not being able to see Patricia, but she's due back in the mission control room for the next mission over Germany, which is a big mission.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, Patricia stayed behind in England when the French troops moved across the channel, so that's why he hasn't seen her in a while. There's a story in the book about when Pierre was promoted to acting wing commander. His CO handed him a huge stack of late paperwork and said, "Try not to die. I'm tired of replacing the wing commander every week."
Thanks, mate.
Yeah, he's like, "Great. Guess I'll just go and tackle all this paperwork that the other guys didn't do because they didn't live long enough."
Yeah, it's very motivating for sure.
Yeah.
The next mission we see is one over the Rhine in Germany on May 3rd, 1945. It's the last day of aerial combat, and Jacques gets shot down. He says goodbye to Patricia over the radio, calling her darling. It's very kind of sad.
It is very sad. I will admit, I got a little bit of a feeling about that one. But good news for Jacques heads. Real Jacques survived the war and lived to old age. So he did not die in this way.
Yeah.
He actually found out in 1990 that he may have led the patrol that critically wounded Erwin Rommel in July of 44. The way Pierre tells this story in the book, he definitely gives Jacques a little bit more credit than Jacques is perhaps entitled to, but Pierre is usually pretty good about that. Like, he'll brag about his own exploits, but he also bigs up his friends too. But basically what happened was Erwin Rommel was traveling in a motorcade. A patrol, possibly led by Jacques, strafed the motorcade. They hit the driver. The Jeep that Rommel was traveling in flipped and threw him out of it, and he ended up with 3 skull fractures. So those are obviously not great for your health. And so Rommel was in a coma for a little while. And then what ended up happening was he got implicated in this plot to assassinate Hitler. And as he was recuperating at home in Germany, a couple of German agents came to his house and were like, "Hey, look, we'll bury you with military honors and we won't let your family go through public disgrace, but you have to kill yourself for your involvement in this plot." And so that seems to be what he did. But yeah, Jacques, possibly involved in critically injuring Erwin Rommel right before his death.
Do we know where this was? You probably do, you probably looked this up. If not, I'm sorry for calling you out. But where did the Rommel thing happen?
It was in Normandy. Yeah, but Rommel was in a coma for a couple of days, and then the Germans insisted on bringing him back to be treated in a German hospital, which probably did not help with the length of his convalescence.
Yeah, but then neither does the fact that they kind of wanted him dead after that.
For sure. Yeah, him probably killing himself was a major factor in him being dead.
Thankfully, we also get some good news because we eventually reach WWII Day in the movie. There are celebrations on the radio, but none of the airmen seem to be having a very good time. Pierre reminisces about the loss of all his friends, goes on one last flight to say goodbye to his beloved planes, and it's very clear that he's not sure what he's gonna do next or how to actually go back to normal life.
Yeah, he talks in the book about the last time he flies his Tempest. After he lands it, the ground crew sees him crying in the cockpit, so they all give him a few minutes alone to compose himself.
Oh, bless. When Sam was reading the book, she was sending me French quotes from the book. I'm better at reading French than I am at listening to it, so I could understand most of those. And it's got some real hard hitters throughout this book. There are some good quotes in it. And I think you're gonna read one for us in English.
So this is from VE Day. He says, "Then came the armistice, like a heavy door closing. 8 incomprehensible days, an indefinable mixture of joys and regrets, noisy displays interrupted by great intermittent calms, and above all this unaccustomed silence, thick, weighing on the airfield, on the tarpaulin-covered plains, the dead squadrons, and the empty runways. The relaxation of the tensed nerves was terrible, painful as a birth. It was enough to make you scream."
Beautiful. If you know any French, please read it in French, because it's even more beautiful in French.
Yeah, it's really lovely. There's another bit too where they're getting ready to go home. He's in the bar with one of his friends who is also a CO, and it's just the two of them in the bar, but he's talking about how he can sense the ghosts of the other guys. So he says, "I looked up at Ken Hughes again. No need for words. We understood each other. Half an hour perhaps passed. And then I swear I suddenly felt that they were all there around us in the shadows and the cigarette smoke, like sad kids who had been unjustly punished. Mackenzie, Jimmy Kelly, Mouse Manson, Little Kid, Bone, Shepherd, Brooker, Gordon, and also dark uniforms with tarnished gold braid who would never see France again. Mouchotte, Mézeli, Béraud, Pierrot Degaille, all of them who had left one fine morning with their Spitfires and their Tempests and who had not returned. Well, Pierre, said Ken, that's the end of it. They won't need us anymore. We went to bed and I closed the door gently so as not to wake the bartender who was sleeping on his stool, and also so as not to disturb the others.
It's beautiful. Like, it's such a poetic way of describing those feelings.
Yeah.
Like that.
And if you think about it too, much of this book is based on letters that he wrote home. And so this is a young man of 24, 25 years old writing this stuff home to his parents, for example. It's beautifully written in parts, for sure.
Yeah. I can't really say that this translates really well to the movie. Like, the movie's pretty straight. It just happens. There's no poetic anything in there.
Yeah, I agree. They definitely didn't really get the spirit of Pierre, I would say.
No, I guess they got a little bit of the bravado, but I feel like they gave most of that to Jacques rather than to Pierre himself.
Yeah, I agree. In the immediate aftermath of the war, Pierre's luck started to run out, and he seemed to be aware of this. So there was a big victory parade where planes from all different Allied groups were flying over Bremerhaven. And Pierre, first of all, was like, I don't think this is a good idea. All these plane groups that have never flown together before don't necessarily know how to fly in formation with each other. But everyone was like, no, we're going to do it. It's going to be great. So he's up there in his Tempest, and what had happened was one of the other guys in his wing, what they're supposed to do is they're supposed to jettison their extra gas tank. And if you don't do that before it runs out, what will happen is the engine will just cut. And so one of the other planes fell onto the plane that was flying right behind Pierre, and that plane ended up clipping Pierre, and Pierre had to jump from his plane in his parachute and ended up being wounded and had a super close call. And one of the other pilots died, unfortunately.
Oh, no.
Yeah. And then, so that was in May. And then in July, he's in Denmark, and the Danish king is like, oh, will you fly over in your Tempest and do some tricks and, whatever. And so Pierre's like, sure, why not? So he gets up in his Tempest again, and he ends up having some engine trouble. And he describes the landing of that as the plane disintegrated for half a kilometer. So he somehow walks away from this without a scratch, and the Danish king is making jokes about how lucky he is and how he escaped by the skin of his teeth. But yeah, he seems to be pretty aware that he's like, I don't know how many more of these I'm going to get,
Yeah, I feel like, why can't fade any further? Just go home, Pierre, go home.
Yeah. There's one more story that I thought was really interesting. VA Day has happened. It's in the week after, it's like May 10th or 11th or something. And he's on an airstrip with some of his guys, and a group of Messerschmitts just shows up. And one of his sergeants is like, well, holy shit, do we shoot at them? And Pierre's like, well, no, the war's over. Like, try not to restart it. So all these Messerschmitts land beautifully on the airstrip, except for the officer's plane. And when he lands it, he deliberately does this maneuver where he bounces one of the wings off the ground. So he symbolically is delivering his plane not intact. And he gets out and he gives his Luger to Pierre as a symbolic, we surrender sort of thing. And it never occurred to me how fighter plane squadrons would have surrendered at the end of the war when everything was kind of chaotic. And I guess that's one of the ways that they did it.
I don't know why, but I just thought in my head they just all went home. Like, okay, bye.
Yeah, I think particularly at the end of the war, the Germans had really dispersed a lot of their airfields because a lot of them had been badly damaged by the Allies. And when they were making their last ditch attempt, they were having to hide their planes in the forest and in other places. During the war, they had built these big underground plane factories and all kinds of things to protect them from the Allies. And so I think by the end of the war, the different squadrons and groups were really spread out all over the place. So it wasn't really a matter of they're all in one place, they all go surrender together.
Right, no, they just had to go wherever they could reach to.
Yeah.
Right, yeah, that makes sense.
Pierre, He was awarded a Distinguished Flying Cross, as we already mentioned. He also got a bar for his DFC in, I want to say, April 1945. He was
What
awarded.
does that mean?
It's like an additional. They're like, hey, you get another one.
It's like you don't get two, but you get one with a bar on it.
He won an American Silver Star. He won the Croix de Guerre with 19 palms, and he won the Grand Croix of the Légion d'honneur. So heavily decorated. After the war, he worked as an aeronautical engineer. He served 8 terms in French Parliament. Really charismatic guy, well known in France. He got really into deep sea fishing randomly. That was his big hobby. He was married and he had 3 sons. He was called up and he flew again in 1956 and 57 during the Algerian War. This was a colonial war where there were Algerian quote unquote rebels trying to get rid of the French colonial masters that they had. There's a little segment at the end of my copy of Le Grand Cirque where Pierre talks a little bit about the Algerian War, and it doesn't sound like he enjoyed himself quite as much as he did during the big show. But yeah, like many war veterans, he became known for his anti-war beliefs later in life, and he died on March 22nd, 2006.
Yeah, so he had a long life then, quite a long life.
Yeah, he was 85, I think, when he died.
Yeah, and a successful life as well. Lots of things happened too. I just want to talk real quickly just about the title, The Big Show, Le Grand Cirque. I've heard that used in synonym just for the war in general. I think it's so interesting to call it that. Like, it's a show of force and of firepower, but it's also what the heck are we doing it for kind of show sometimes. Like, what are we even fighting for? So I don't really know what I want to say about it. I just wanted to mention it.
Yeah, right at the end of the book, he has a little passage where he sort of makes reference to the fact that Le Grand Cirque, like the big show, is what they called World War II. And obviously a cirque is also a circus. And so this little passage, he talks about, yeah, long after the circus is gone and they pack up the tent and when all that's left is the peg holes in the ground and blah, blah, blah. He's like, eventually people will forget about this. And yeah, so he does kind of make reference to those kind of double meanings at the end.
Yeah. It's interesting. I do wonder what this movie would have been if it had been an American story. I feel like it would have been much different. We talked about this a little bit offline. And we kind of want another Pierre story, like a bigger Pierre story for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know who would make it, but I would love to see this memoir get, the Hollywood treatment and get made into like a big sweeping war epic. I think it would be great. I'm
just manifesting it now that we're gonna write the script and it's gonna get picked up by someone. I'm just manifesting. I'm just doing it.
Absolutely. How hard can it be to write a screenplay?
I mean, that's what we thought about starting a podcast too, to be fair. So you never know. We have to rate this.
We do.
What are we going to rate it? I don't know. Do you have any ideas?
Repetitive missions out of 10?
Let's do it. How many repetitive missions out of 10 would you rate this movie?
Gosh, y'all. I'm going to give this movie like 4.5 repetitive missions out of 10. I thought it was fine when I watched it, if I'm honest, because I watched it before I read the book and I was like, yeah, this is all right. I don't mind the combat scenes. It's very 1950s in this shoehorned in romance. They're like, we can't make a movie without a lady. And I mean, the female character is not very deep by any means, but she is in there. So there is that. And yeah, and then I read the book and the book was really good. So then I was kind of thinking about all the ways that I would make the movie differently if it were me. And yeah, so not that excited about it, but y'all go read the book. Can't speak for the English translation, but the French version is really good. I would give the book like probably a 9 repetitive missions out of 10. So
okay. So I would give the movie, being also that I did not understand what they were saying, I would give it probably also a 4.5 repetitive missions out of 10. It's not too long. It's not like super, super duper long. So it's all right. And like you said, there's some good flying and missions in there, but also they're all the same. And I feel like what I'm kind of missing in this movie is some stakes. There's not really a stake to any of it. So yeah, not good, not great. But also I feel glad to have watched a French movie. I like watching movies from different countries for sure. I didn't mind the acting, but I also didn't love it. So overall, just a bit nah about the whole thing. And I did notice how little music there is in this movie. I feel like they didn't have the budget to buy like actual music. Sometimes the music makes a movie better than it is, but there's no music in this barely. So
Yeah, and I think that plays into the kind of flatness of it. Narrative flatness, emotional flatness. There aren't any really cool cinematography moments and stuff. It's just really, it's fine, but it's no hell,
There's 49 shots of like 4 fighter aircraft just in the air doing nothing but flying. So there's a lot of that.
There is, but I agree that I don't think we watched a French movie yet. That was kind of fun. That was a perspective we didn't get before. And I learned a lot about the Free French that I didn't know, that I thought was fascinating. So I'm happy about that.
Yeah. I agree. I also, through you, learned quite a bit. Thanks.
Y'all, I subjected Mar to so much Pierre while I was reading this book. I was like, here's another passage from Pierre. Here's another one. It was like 10 a day. I was sending little snippets over.
But it's more fun if you get to talk about it when you're reading. So I agree. Speaking of reading, are you reading anything?
I'm reading Other Than Honorable by Matt Hardman. I just started it last night.
I'm also reading that book. What a strange coincidence.
Crazy.
I really like it so far. I'm about a third of the way in already, and I quite like it. It's fun.
It's got good pacing, yeah.
Yeah. And I'm also reading Agent Zero by Claire Melly. I feel like I must have said it about 4 times on the podcast already, but I'm still reading it.
Yeah, that one is on my docket, but I was laying in bed last night and I had left my book in the other room. So I was like, well, we're going to read something that I have available on my phone.
And I feel like this book is good for like when you want to engage your brain, but also don't want to have to pay too close attention. I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean that in a good way. It's an entertaining book.
Yeah.
So, thanks everybody for listening. You can find us wherever you get your podcast and rate us 5 stars. We would very much appreciate it. You can follow us on Instagram at Rosie the Reviewer Podcast. Or actually, you can also visit our website, rosieTheReviewer.com, for more information. And you can send this episode about our new favorite Pierre to a friend, because Pierre needs more fans. So do that, please.
Yeah, does need more fans. Like, listen, this is a Pierre Clostermann fan page now.
He's so fun. I'm not even kidding. Like, if this had been an American story, people would be all over it, I'm pretty sure. So, get on that, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.